Meeting. Call to order the June 26, 2012 meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have the roll call, please?
Authority members: Friedman.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Karazian.
Here.
Montero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Sharon Najarian.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the June 26, 2012 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, June 21, 2012 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. The next item?
Next item is the approval of the minutes.
I'll move the minutes for June 19th. However, Ms. Friedman, Mr. Manukin, and Ms. Parazian weren't here. They took
Okay.
Second.
They can still participate if they watched any of the proceedings on the internet or on a CD version. That's up to you, I guess. If you want to abstain, now's the chance to do so. Otherwise, with no other objections or corrections, the minutes will be approved as submitted.
If we're not taking a vote, Mr. Chair, I will abstain from the vote on the minutes.
Okay.
I'll abstain from the minutes as well.
Noting the abstentions of the three individuals Mr. Mincy noted. Next item, please.
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the Housing Authority may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the matter may be referred to staff through the Executive Director for investigation and report.
Herbert Milano, followed by Richard Espiritu.
Housing Authority Chair Najarian, members of the Housing Authority and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. Last week, while Ms. Friedman was absent, I brought up the issue of the Youth Strategy Report to see when we perhaps can get this report back for your consideration. I believe it's part of the series of inquiries that I made of the Housing Authority to bring back both the Quality of Life Indicators Report, now the Youth Strategy Report, as a way of assessing the unmet needs of many youth in Glendale, particularly in the area south of the 134 freeway. It is my contention that a solid strategic plan that addresses the metrics of the unmet needs should also be incorporated somehow, be incorporated into the general plan. Ms. Friedman, you have been a strong proponent of cycling. I think that as the city begins to incorporate these concepts of engaging the community into these ideals of exercise, activity for youth and families, hopefully activities that they can partake in jointly, will allow us to at least start creating some of the metrics that you need to incorporate so that we can create a better quality of life. This past week and this morning, I was listening to the other national metrics with regard to obesity. 1 out of every 3 adults is now considered obese. And there's another report that I could send a reference to you later concerning the relationship between obesity in a particular community and the availability of parkland and the programs that cities create in order to encourage an active participation of the public. It's a significant health problem. It's a significant problem when we are not able to engage our youth effectively. And I think that what we need is a metric that will let us know what is the unmet need. When the swimming pool was closed back in, I think it was 2001, and from that year till the year that it was a new one was replaced, basically the youth in Glendale had to go either to the YMCA if they had availability or if they could afford it, or they would have to go to Pasadena or Los Angeles in order to be able to get an adequate facility. Burbank has one as well that is particularly heavily used. But I think that when we start looking at the type of solutions that we came in with in the past, pocket parks in certain corners that address the needs of people over 70 and maybe kids up to the age of 5, but it doesn't really address the needs of active youth. I think that that approach that does not address sufficient parkland and sufficient investment is overall harmful. The recreational planning areas, of which from time to time I bring those up, shows a significant unmet need. Recreational Planning Area 10, that generally is from Glen Oaks to Broadway and from Brand to roughly a little bit beyond Adams, is an area of 32,000 people. And we have available basically two small parcels of land that is Wilson Mini Park. That's it. There is Piedmont, but that park, you can hardly consider that a park. It's just so tiny. And it is when you begin to look at these metrics as to what the national standards are. 6 acres per thousand. Recreational Planning Area 10, 0.002 acres per thousand. And so you devise a system by which you can collect monies, an impact fee, so you can resolve that need. And then when I look at the budget, I find that those monies are being now moved over to Dugmagian Park and the sports complex, 12 miles away and 4 miles away. I thought the concept was to put those monies precisely in the areas where the need is, not to take those monies and put it someplace else. And that's why I think that a review of how we set our priorities, from the review of how police and fire have overtaken in the budget so that more and more of the city's budget as a proportion of the totals basically is going to them and less is available for the infrastructure and the programming needs. Tonight you're going to be approving, those MOUs. And I don't see much of a difference. I don't see much of the consideration concerning the dire problems that exist that need to be met through additional facilities and programs. And that's what it is. We, in a way, are paying for luxury retirements at the expense of youth and families that are in need. And I think that it is worthwhile bringing this up as part of your strategic plan in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Espiritu?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority and staff. I am Richard Espiritu. Several weeks ago, in the Sunday Glendale News Press, Mr. Ochoa was talking about the fact that the county and the state have been playing games with the city of Glendale's money. I think we're talking about a game of Trump. The county has trumped the city of Glendale. The state of California has trumped us all. And everybody forgets about the federal government, who can trump not only the state, the county, and the city. You have projects coming up in front of you later on today, and it's partly being funded by HUD. You also have to comply with something called the Americans with Disability Act, which I'm going to be talking about very seriously. And you also have some stupid law that came up a long time ago called FEMA. And we did a disaster plan. We did a huge looking at our buildings here in the city of Glendale that are dangerous to those residents if, in fact, they become residential properties. That was part of a report that I had the pleasure of reading a long time ago that was done by the Glendale Fire Department. With that said, I want to let you know that both ADA, HUD, and FEMA are enforced by some organization called the Department of Justice. And I think they trump everybody. Thank you very much.
I have no other cards for oral communications. Oral communications is closed. Yes.
I just wanted to address Mr. Milano's concerns about spending on youth and parks. I completely agree with him that South Glendale for many years has been park poor. It was done over the years. It was built without a lot of consideration for large park space in that area. At this point, it's difficult because you'd have to basically buy property that's been developed as multifamily housing, dislocate the people that are living there, assemble a large group of property, and build a park. But I will say that we have more than 2 parks in South Glendale. He mentioned 2, and there's more than 2. And we've been putting a lot of investment in the past several years in the parks in South Glendale. In addition, one of the things that I think is very important that we've been talking about for several years and do have support from our Congressman Adam Schiff is to have a bridge from South Glendale, from the densest part of the city, to Griffith Park, a pedestrian and bicycle bridge, so that people who live there can easily get to what's the largest park in any city in the country, any urban city in the country. That park is really within spitting distance of those people who live in South Glendale. The problem is they can't access it easily or safely. So rather than trying to build Griffith Park in South Glendale, which is going to displace thousands of people, I think what makes sense is to really concentrate on that bridge and on those pocket parks and on assembling property when we do have the chance. I also wanted to point out that the city has made major investments over the years in something called Minutemen, which is a youth recreation facility that serves thousands and thousands of young people in South Glendale. So I don't believe that we've ignored the youth of Glendale, and I think that Minutemen may be our largest source of CDBG funding, or one of our largest nonprofits that receive CDBG funding from the city and from the federal government. And millions of dollars have gone from the city to that organization, and they do an amazing job serving our youth, and particularly in the area of athletics, but also in tutoring and that sort of thing. So while I agree with him that there are challenges, I disagree that the city's been ignoring the youth and ignoring South Glendale. I think the evidence shows quite the contrary. Thank you.
Mr. Quintero.
Well, I frequently drive by Palmer Park, which is always very active, as well as Maple Park, Pacific Park. All three of those have basketball leagues and all kinds of activities for teenagers, young adults. But I do recommend, as I have for many years, that Mr. Milano go to the Glendale Unified School District and appear in front of them and see if we can open up some of the junior high and high schools for Glendale youth. We've been successful with a couple of projects, including Pacific Edison, but there's a lot more we can do. So we should start spending some time at the school district, see if the board there agrees with them.
I mean, the new Adams Square Park comes to mind, the Cerritos Park.
Maryland Mini Park?
So I'm not sure.
Maryland Mini Park?
Not sure why Mr. Milano only named two parks and disregarded one offhand, but clearly that is where the money has been going. This council, authority, and redevelopment agency, respectively, has been putting their attention, not to mention the pool and the artificial turf that we're going to be putting into Pacific Park for year-round play. Let's move to the next item, please.
Next item at 6A is Director of Community Development regarding rehabilitation of an 18-unit senior rental affordable housing project with priority preference for senior veterans at 311 East Cypress Street. At 1 is a resolution approving and authorizing an affordable housing agreement with Community Development Partners, California for-profit corporation. 2 is a resolution appropriating $1,447,523 to provide home grant funds for the loan agreement. 3 is a motion approving fiscal year 2011-12 home action plan amendment.
Okay, Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, sir, and may it please the board, last month, excuse me, we had before you several projects for consideration, the first two of which are these items on your Housing Authority agenda that revolve around the use of home funds for low and very low income rental properties, including rehabs as well as new construction. I will have the Deputy Director of Housing, Peter Zovac, come on up to give you the details very briefly on these items, seeing as you've seen them previously.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority. As City Manager Ochoa had stated, back on March 15th, just 6 weeks ago, the Housing Authority received a report that discussed affordable housing programs or proposals for the 2012 fiscal year. Based upon that meeting, Artie, if you could. Based upon that meeting,
I don't know if this is the one. Yes, it is. Never mind. Got it.
based upon that meeting, the Housing Authority prioritized 3 affordable housing proposals and 1 affordable housing concept. Those proposals were the Cypress Senior Living Project, which is the one subject to this presentation right now. Developers Community Development Partners, the address is 311 East Cypress. The second project was S.H. Ho Hope Compassion Center, address at 1911 Gardena. and the third project was the Veteran Village of Glendale, Saffron and Associates at 327, 331 West Salem, and parking lot number 12. The fourth proposal, the Housing Authority elected to pursue it as a concept, is the YMCA proposal. Just a quick update on that particular one. A task force, as described to the Housing Authority in the staff report at the May 15th meeting, has been formed. We have our first meeting with the YMCA board members in July 10th. So in this particular proposal, the Cypress Senior Living is before you right now. It's at 311 East Cypress. It is just east of Glendale Avenue, just north of Los Feliz. It is a two-story brick building built in 1928. The proposal is for an acquisition rehabilitation 9% tax credit project. Currently, it's a mix of efficiency/studio units and one-bedroom units. The 18 units, once rehabilitated, will be reserved for seniors, of which 6 units will be given a veteran's preference, seniors' veteran's preference, I should say. I mentioned it was developed in 1928. The developer has a purchase option on the property through December 31st, 2012. As we discussed at the meeting, this is advantageous to all parties involved because it doesn't require the Housing Authority or the developer to take down and acquire the property now before knowing whether or not they have an award of credits. The requested funding assistance is $1.4 million in home funds. It's approximately $80,000 per unit. The developer intends to apply for tax credits in this month's round, the end of July, so we'll know fairly quickly as to whether or not they're going to be able to move this project forward after the Housing Authority's actions today. Staff is requesting the Housing Authority adopt a resolution approving and authorizing the Executive Director to enter into an affordable housing agreement with community development partners. We are also requesting approval of the Housing Authority resolution of appropriation. And as mentioned earlier, Housing Authority motion approving the fiscal year 2011-2012 Home Action Plan amendment. Annually, the Housing Authority and the city must put together an action plan for the use of federal funds. That action plan was previously adopted by the Housing Authority. It did not envision this proposal here. It was prior to this proposal coming before you. And as a result, we're required to amend it to reflect this. I have Housing Project Manager Mike Fortney here. If you have any additional specific questions.
I have a question. Since this is a rehab project and building was built in 1928, what are we setting aside in terms of cost overruns or just issues that are going to come up that may require more than what we budgeted for?
All right. There's a contingency in the estimate of construction for any unexpected costs that might pop up. We're aware that with rehabilitation, it's a little more difficult than new construction. You're not knowing once you open up a wall what you get into. We're cognizant of that, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to keep the costs within the scope of the project budget.
And the contingency is 10% or what?
10%.
And in the event it goes over, then what?
We'll look at whether or not there are any other line items within the budget that may be able to make up for a contingency over 10%. If not, whether or not there is any additional tax credit proceeds that might be able to pay for those overages. And then if there are no other funding sources to be able to address it, whether or not it would be possible to take a look at City Housing Authority assistance and whether or not it would be appropriate to suggest that.
What are we going to do with the tenants? How much is that going to cost us?
The final projected population for this proposal is a senior
No, I'm sorry,
population.
the existing tenants.
And as a result of that, the existing tenants that don't meet the definitions of being lower income seniors will have to be relocated. There's an allowance for that within the budgets. That would be the first activity to take place. And we'd be coming back at various points in the timeline to get Housing Authority approval of a relocation plan and the various other documents that are required approval when you have relocation. We'll have a consultant come in and interview and discuss with the tenants what needs to be done.
Mr. Mnuchin?
Yes. Considering the past, the history of affordable housing developers over the past couple of years, and our experience with the city of Glendale with them. We have a developer that was founded in 2012. Have we looked at that? That does not inspire confidence when I look at that there's a company that was formed this year and is doing an affordable project in Glendale, and we're committing almost $1.5 million in funds to that organization. Have we looked at the background and the individuals who are forming this organization and the history with their developments in the past?
Yes, we have. That is a concern that staff had as well. It is a fairly new group. The group, though, had previously worked in the affordable housing field with other entities prior to submitting this proposal to the city. We took a look at the nature of this project, given that they're a new entity. It is not, as I mentioned, a new construction project. The risk involved with any type of acquisition that might be needed before an award of credits is not there, as it has been with previous projects. Length of time is not necessarily the best indicator that a developer is a competent developer. I'm sure
It's one of the indicators.
it's an indicator, but not a rule per se. There are developers that have been out there for long periods of times that may not be considered the best developers. So we did ask for and received a due diligence checklist completed by the developer. Those references, that checklist, that submittal was reviewed by staff.
Is it
and they did find
included
to
in the
be.
staff report, the checklist?
Say again?
Is the checklist included in the staff
The
report?
checklist is not included in the staff report, no.
The second concern is, if I remember correctly, the credits, the 9% credit is very hard to come by.
It is.
Historically, have we signed an agreement before they receive the credit or after?
Before.
Before?
Because
And-
the program requires that, the state program, credit program requires that the developer show
Commitment from the
commitment
city
by a local
before.
agency.
Okay. And if they don't receive the 9% credit, then this project's on hold? Is that how it will
Correct.
work?
Also part.
What is the cost per square foot? And you have the costs per unit here of approximately $80,400 that we're committing. And the next project that we're going to look at is $31,700 per unit. What is the cost per unit of building a brand-new building per square foot? Do we know that?
I can have Housing Project Manager Mike Fortney address that.
And how does it compare to the amount that we are committing for this project per square foot?
Address that. Any other questions before having Mr. Fortney come up?
I have some questions, but since that has been asked, why don't we
Sure.
that answer?
Good afternoon. Mike Ford, your Housing Project Manager. We looked at the cost per square foot on the new construction. Those costs were $120 for the residential portion and $60 per square foot for the garage, for an average of about $102 per square foot. That's for the new construction project that you'll see before you shortly. And that's considerably lower than some of the products we had in the past. We did a comparison of the Central City Lights project that received a letter of loan commitment from the Housing Authority on the same site as the Veterans Village, and I can give you numbers to compare the two.
I don't want to compare anything. I just want to know what the market rate is currently, and what is being proposed per square foot, and what is our commitment per square foot.
Okay, and we on the rehab projects, this one and the other one for you, we didn't look at it on a per square foot basis.
Okay,
what we did was we looked at the scope of work, and each item has an estimate for that, and we looked at that to see if those were.
I would like to know the square foot price of what they're committing to this project.
Okay, it's not a number I can
What
give
is the
you.
square footage for the project, the total square
It's not a number I can give you right now. I'll have to get back to you.
All right, then I'm not going to vote for it unless I have those numbers.
I have a question. I see that we're reserving 6 of these for veterans. Senior veterans. Well, it's a senior project.
Correct.
I imagine, and we have on another agenda, we also have a veterans preference given. How do you actually do that? I mean, does a Marine have preference over a naval officer? Does someone who had combat have preference over someone who had a desk? Does someone who was wounded have has preference over someone who is not? Do more recent wars? I mean, I can imagine, if a wounded vet came before us and said, I'm a vet, I should have been picked. You picked him, and he was in Iowa, sorting furloughs or whatever. How do you do that? How do we, as an agency and authority, sort through the presumably large? I'm expecting that this will get a large response. How do you make those decisions?
That is not something that has been decided upon at this point for the purpose of submitting an application to TCAC. Typically what happens in all of our projects, not just this one, is that we approve an agreement, we wait to receive notice as to whether or not the project is moving forward, then we come back at a later time to the Housing Authority with a marketing plan for the project in which the qualifications, in this particular case with regards to veterans, would be discussed and proposed and discussed and then voted upon by the Housing Authority.
Let me throw something else at you. What if someone, a veteran from an allied army, applies? Can we discriminate against him or her because of that affiliation?
I think you might be able to without getting too much into it, but it is something that would be coming in at a later time, and it's not anything that staff is prepared to discuss right now.
Okay. These are just my thoughts.
Correct.
We haven't had this problem before because we had never reserved housing for veterans to the extent that we are and will be doing in the near future. So,
But we may very well end up following guidelines as established by the VA, and if they would differentiate between combat versus non-combat, then we might follow suit, and if they don't, we probably wouldn't. At least that's what would be brought back to the council.
decorated, there's discharge, honorable.
Yeah, but I can tell you right now they don't. Veterans are treated equally whether they're combat veterans or not.
So in the military,
Should we treat them
you don't
differently?
have a choice of where you go.
Should
Yeah,
we?
as a combat vet, I was very upset that the GI Bill would be extended to those who weren't in combat. And it was funny because teenagers, that era, everyone in my infantry platoon thought, oh no, this will only go to us, not those guys back in the rear. But that was obviously,
So this maybe will be an
they were
interesting.
hallucinating at the time.
This maybe will be an interesting discussion that we'll be sure to make sure we have a chance to discuss that when the policy is being framed.
We do intend to bring that back in addition to how to define a veteran and whether or not there are any priorities of one veteran over another. It would be the marketing component as well that we would want to clearly spell out and talk about how we're going to do outreach to that particular population. And then how to keep a waiting list for that particular population active as opposed to frozen at one time at the beginning of when a project's first opening up. How to be able to keep that ongoing for that component. Because as they get released over the course of year after year after year, the last thing you'd want to have done after investing this amount of money is to a project where that particular preference is frozen and no one could apply later on. So those are all elements that we've thought about and we need to come back to if and when the projects get approved at the tax credit level.
Okay, Ms. Perazia?
I have a question. In case the developer can't get approval in July, which is the deadline for the tax credit, in July, which is the deadline for 2012, can he reapply for the March?
Yes, they could reapply.
Okay.
In the meantime, they would have to then, because their purchase option is good through December 2012, they would have to come to an agreement with the property owner on their open escrow.
Okay. And I have one more question. And the building hasn't been done any renovation after since the built here?
There has been rehabilitation in the building over time, yes. Is it the best rehabilitation? No, not necessarily. Is it functional? No. And so we hope that with this acquisition and rehabilitation proposal, we'd be able to bring it up to as much to code as possible.
No retrofitting?
No seismic retrofitting. That had already been required by the city years ago and been implemented by the owner at that time.
Ms. Friedman?
First, I don't mind if we continue the item for a week to get Mr. Menuchyan his answers, and if I would be happy to make a motion as such if there are no objections.
I think we may have an answer.
And secondly, unless they have an answer now, and secondly, I would like to respectfully suggest to my colleagues that when possible, we ask questions of staff in advance, since we do have our packets in advance, so that we don't run into this kind of situation, that we give them a heads up if we have questions, so that they are prepared with the answers at the meetings. And I know that's not always possible, but they are always around to answer our questions, and just sending them an email and saying, I have this question, I'm going to bring it up, and usually they'll have the answer for us at the meeting. Did you have the information?
Sounds like we do have an answer for that,
Perfect.
and I'll let Mike...
And
Is he doing
restate the
quick
question.
calculations back there with
Yes,
your...
exactly right. I apologize for the not having the answer ahead. We did do the calculations at 10,200 square feet. That's the building footprint. The hard costs are $88 a square foot.
Pardon me?
It's $88 per square foot.
$80 per square
88?
foot? $88
Yes.
per square foot?
Yes. Mhm.
Is our commitment?
Pardon?
What is our commitment?
Our commitment total?
What is the total cost per unit per square foot, and what is our commitment per square foot?
I'll have to calculate our
Okay.
commitment per square foot.
All right.
And just so we can remind ourselves that this is our first foray into rehabbing existing buildings rather than building from scratch.
Well,
Under
it's
the tax
not
credit
exactly,
program.
it's not the first one. There was one done many years ago before, I think even Mr. Weaver wasn't on. There was one done, I forget the street, it's right in that
Okay.
direction off.
One of our most recent.
Yeah.
And this was in response to the idea that rehabbing would make our housing dollars go further than building from scratch. And this building, in particular, has an added benefit to the neighborhood because there is a parking impact to that, and seniors will be removing a problem property and making it into something that will have less of an impact on the community by identifying this.
That is correct. Multiple benefits to pursuing this acquisition
Which
rehabilitation
isn't
project.
necessarily quantifiable, but
Correct.
are there more? Do you have more answers, Mr. Fortney? I know.
Okay. The Housing Authority's subsidy on a per square foot basis is $142.
$142?
$142, that's right.
Our commitment is $142?
$142 per square foot, yes.
And
That's basically-
building a new residential is on average $102 per square foot?
Oh, our subsidy per unit, per square foot?
Well, that's a total, $142 is the total cost per square foot.
No, $142 represents the Housing Authority's commitment on a per square foot basis to this project.
Okay. And you had said earlier that to build a new project, the market rate is $102 on average per square foot.
Different. The answer, what I was telling you there was our budget for hard construction costs for new is $120 for the residential, $60 for the, so I didn't.
I'm trying to compare, so if you're giving me apples and oranges, I'm comparing them. If you're giving me apples and oranges, I'm comparing apples and oranges. You got to give me apples and apples. Now, what are the costs? I'm trying to compare the market rate to what we're paying, basically. Very simple. What is the market rate and what are we paying for it? And what is our subsidy in that?
Okay. I didn't give you the number of the Housing Authority subsidy per square foot on the other projects, which is what you asked for on Cypress. So now you want to compare
What other projects?
the other projects, the new construction as well. as the
We're
other
looking
rehab.
at this project.
Yes.
So I want to compare market rate to what we're paying, basically. What this development
Well, we
is.
believe that the costs budgeted for this project are market rate costs.
Okay.
Could I butt in here?
Butt in, please.
I'm trying to take notes. Can you start from the beginning and tell us what the new construction would cost, both the overall cost and the city subsidies cost? Could you give us that again?
If, on the new construction?
Yeah.
Okay. We have, and this is the Veterans Village project, this is our new construction. Our budget calls for $120 per square foot for the residential portion of the project, and $60 per square foot for the garage construction.
What do you mean, our budget?
The budget that the Developer and Housing Authority have brought
Together.
forth within the AHA.
But together, both our subsidy and the
102.
developer's commitment.
So that's $102 a square foot hard cost for both residential as well as
Garage.
the garage, right? But
But that's new construction.
that's new construction, exactly.
So on a rehab like this,
Should be cheaper.
not necessarily.
That's what I'm trying to get. Why not?
Rehab can be even more expensive than new construction, depending on what type of rehab it is.
But in this case, as I'd said, our hard cost for this rehab is $88 per square
So
foot.
it's actually,
$88. Out of the $88, how much is the authority's commitment?
Well, our commitment to the project is $144 per square foot. But you recall, we're acquiring the property. We're doing the hard, the project is acquiring the property, doing all the hard costs. There's a lot of soft costs that are associated with it, and then the subsidized rents after that.
Mike, what's the total project cost per square foot, and how does that break down between the developer and the city?
Okay, the total development cost for this, including the acquisition of the building, the acquisition alone is $1,950,000.
Who's acquiring the building? Are we acquiring or
No,
they are?
no, and that's unique to this as well. The developer has a purchase option good through the end of the year. They will acquire the property. Our funds won't go in until after the property's already been acquired. Our funds will go in after the property is acquired, also after some of the tax credit equity has gone in. Then we'll go in. Then whatever's left to finish the construction will be done by a private construction loan. But the total development of this project, including the $1.95 million to acquire, is $4,175,758.
And so if you take that and divide it by 10,800?
10,200. You
Oh,
come up to
10,200.
it's actually a pretty large number. It's
50-something?
400, yes, just over $400 a square foot.
So we
Total
can,
development cost.
if the council desires, we can categorize our cost per square foot on the overall project cost, what the developer's cost is, what our investment is, and break it down. But those are, they are a little bit of the apples and oranges. We're measuring different things, different
Right.
ratios.
So if it's 10,200 square feet, our commitment's about $150 per unit, per square foot.
142.
140.
$144.70. Well, I want to compare the $417 to, and I'm trying to look at the whole cost of the project as a whole. How does that compare to the market rate today? Is the market rate at 300 and, the taxpayers are overpaying for an affordable housing rehab, or to build a new project today it would take us $500 a square foot, and therefore taxpayers are saving $80?
And I think when you Mike, go back to your discussion about the other projects that we have.
Yes.
By way of reference.
Yes.
We are looking at those numbers as overall city numbers, or those market numbers that are out there to compare against?
When I was talking about the new construction, I was talking about the actual cost, hard cost of construction. I did not talk about.
Do we have
subsidy.
an industry number that
I'm
we
not
would
a
compare
builder.
to?
When you say hard cost, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, that's the physical. That's the physical construction.
Okay. Does
Right.
that include land and the construction, or just construction?
Just the construction.
Just the construction.
The cost to pay the general contractor to build the project.
Throughout that cost, whether we buy it or they buy it, if it's going to be new construction, we're going to demolish the old building and build new.
Yes.
This one, it's you rehab the existing building.
Right.
So what is comparative cost? Forget the land cost. It's a wash whether we buy it or they buy it. theoretically, get the same price from the current owner. We'll throw it out.
Right.
Demolish, construct new, or rehab old. What's the cost per square foot?
Okay, well, I can give you, like, on Veterans Village as an example, you don't have the demolition, but it's a new construction. Total development cost of that is $15.5 million, roughly. It's a little bit less than that for a 44-unit. So if you want to know the total development cost per unit of a new construction, that's $351,000 per unit.
That's assuming the demolishing and the building.
Yes, in this particular case, there is no demolition.
I know, but to compare, there's new construction, it would mean we would have to demolish to build new on that site.
On the Cypress site, yes.
So there's a cost there per square foot.
Right.
If you just rehab, you're not demolishing, so there's another cost per square foot.
Right.
Wouldn't it be lower?
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's a two.
I never had a proposal before me that asked me to demolish Cypress and rebuild a new one, so I don't know.
I think.
I mean, I
that's-
could try to, we can estimate that.
I think that's what Mr. Menuchen's asking.
This could-
All right. I mean, we're going in the way of rehabbing buildings because the logic is that it will be much more cost efficient to do so as opposed to demolishing and building. I'm just trying to see if it actually does come in at a more reasonable price than demolishing and building a new one.
Okay.
That's,
And quite frankly, to answer the question,
You're
sometimes it
telling me-
does, sometimes it doesn't.
well, then if it doesn't, then it doesn't meet my goal of building affordable housing at a more affordable price, right?
Yeah, there are other considerations, of course, but in some...
Not for me.
Okay. But in some cases, building new is less expensive than rehabbing. In other cases, rehabbing is less expensive.
And why would you rehab it if costly?
Well, in this particular case, the rehab cost per unit is pretty low.
And that's based on you haven't opened up the walls to find out what you have.
That's true. That's true.
Whether you have asbestos, where you have
Lead,
all wiring has to be done.
yes.
You make certain assumptions
Yes.
on what it's going to cost
Right.
without
But in this-
opening the walls.
Yes. But in this particular case, the housing authority subsidy per unit is low compared to a new construction.
$150 a square foot?
It-
I was under the impression that you can build a brand-new building with around $200 to $300 a square foot. Am I
You-
incorrect?
Numbers I've seen for new construction for single-family residential will go anywhere from $125 to $200 a foot construction.
And just
And
construction?
that's not a Cadillac version. That's your normal
Right.
kind of,
And that wouldn't include land.
not including that's just your
This
hard
includes
construction.
land.
Depending on your finishes, your fixtures, and everything else. As a rehab, depending on the kind of rehab it is, it could be more than that, it could be less than that. Now, if this particular project was not seismically retrofitted, if we had reason to believe in due diligence that it had some significant abatement that had to go along with it, then the rehab cost could be significantly higher, and the council would be in a position to say, or the board would be in a position to say, no, it's not worth it. This is just too expensive. Go buy another rehab building to do. As we look at this particular project, I think it was $88
Yes, on the hard costs, yes.
on the hard cost. Relatively speaking, it's going to be less expensive than what your new construction is going to cost you. We believe that there's value there. But on a different building, that might not be the case, and we wouldn't recommend it to you.
Wouldn't you also have to build some kind of parking if you were to do a new building on this site?
Yes.
Probably subterranean, which would be very expensive.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
And keeping in mind, public investments for this type of project are really, the private market wouldn't do this project on its own. And that's where redevelopment comes in. That's where affordable housing dollars tend to come in to close the gap between the
That's where
ability.
the tax credit comes in,
That's where the tax credit comes in.
which is a major part of the financing for this project. $2.3 million, if I'm not mistaken.
And thus it is it's a little more than half of the cost of this
Right.
project. So it doesn't, even the very attractive 9% tax credit only gets you halfway there. In order to do this kind of project, very low rental income, 18 units, it takes the 9% tax credit and a little bit more from the city or from the housing authority. If ultimately the housing authority says, well, as we look at $80,000 per unit, that's just too much. It ought to be less. It ought to be closer to the S.H. Hope target. Well, then the council gets to make or board gets to make the qualitative decision, the policy decision to say, that's too much, we want to do something else. But I think even there, when you look at the circumstances surrounding the Gardena project and the Cypress project, they are different. I mean, it takes all kinds to do this type of deal.
What makes me uncomfortable about this project, other than the cost, is that the developer is only investing 25% in the whole project, and governmental entities are pretty much investing 75% of the funds, and that makes me uncomfortable when it comes to this project, and the cost in terms of the per square foot price of having this affordable or developing this affordable project.
I would submit to you, though, as you look at the vast majority of affordable housing deals, you are going to see developers leverage private equity with government funding, because without government funding, you wouldn't do affordable housing deals. They don't pencil in the marketplace.
But that much, up to 75%?
It could be, depending on the project, sure. It could be more. Some of the projects we've done have been significantly higher leveraged.
Yes. That's typical in affordable housing.
Has the buyer done his due diligence? Check out the condition. When he's making the offer, he must have done some sorts of inspection.
Yes.
Out exactly what it's going to cost to rehab.
Yes, city staff did as well.
Okay, so pretty much do you know if there's asbestos in the walls?
We have not tested for asbestos yet. Or lead. Those tests will be done.
How about electrical or water lines or anything?
No, it was just a pure physical inspection of the unit.
It's just looking around.
How can you come up with a cost?
How do you come up with
You come up with a cost, and I thought I had attached the scope of development to the staff report. I can't swear that I did, but the costs are an assumption for replacing the roof, replacing the windows. Those are things that you can bid out. Replacing appliances, things of that sort, is a big. Replacing the flooring, redoing bathrooms, things like that. Those are all things that you can look at. You see that those things are in need of replacement, and then you have a contingency for things like, whether the lead test comes back positive or not.
Yeah, just that could get out of hand depending on what it is. If there's asbestos throughout, built in the year that it was, it could be extensive. You could be tearing every wall out.
I think that's where the developer will go through that level of due diligence on the building and come back to us and say, here is what the additional elements are of cost, and we have a contingency. And if that contingency is insufficient, then again we have a decision. All the issues run back through the board to say, well, then we have a decision to make whether or not we want to invest more or cut bait.
Okay, so we have steps yet to take on approval of this project for it to go forward.
It has to be that way, because even then the developer, nobody is going to go, and not nobody, it would be uncommon for the developer to get that far ahead and do all of that testing, spending hard dollars until he knows that there is a deal to be had. Right? And you got to walk that cat backwards from that end of the due diligence.
To make sure that there will be additional testing, whatever, and they will come back if it gets out of line.
Yes.
Say, hey, we need more subsidy. I've heard that one before too many times. We have the chance to say, no, we drew the line.
Certainly.
More.
Okay, I'd like to have a vote on this at some point, but I have a card from Richard Espiritu. 3 minutes.
Once again, Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, I am Rich Espiritu, and I won't take up my 3 minutes. This particular project on Cypress, I'm opposed to. And I'll tell you the reason why I'm opposed to it. The new ADA guidelines state that any building, new construction or a major retrofit, has to have an elevator if it's more than 2 stories high. This is more. This is 3. So they're going to have to put it in an elevator because that's federal law. Sorry about that. That trumps everybody else. The other new guidelines in ADA is that you have to have a minimum number of mobility accessible apartments, and the new twist in that, which is part of the new guidelines, is they need to have accessible sensory apartments. And the guidelines for this particular facility, which is 18, is 1 mobile and 1 sensory. Unfortunately, this is going to be designed for seniors and senior disabled veterans. They have to meet far and above this guideline of 2. So with that said, I'm done with my objection to this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zobak?
Well, there are
Mr. Espiritu says we need an elevator for this unit, for this building. Is that correct?
I heard the speaker state that when you have 3 or more stories, you need an elevator. This proposal is 2 stories.
It's 2 stories?
Yes.
Looks like it in the picture.
Okay.
So we will not get a request for an elevator later?
No.
It is, we'll be voting it down.
Okay. I see there's a little parapet or something over.
There is. There's a.
So maybe that's where
There's
they're counting
a
the
janitor's
third story.
type of
Attic or
closet
something.
at rooftop access at the
Okay.
very top, but it's less than.
Okay, so that
50
means he
square feet.
supports it now.
It is still a senior building, though, so we're not, I assumed we were going to install an elevator, so there won't be an elevator to the 2nd floor.
There will not be.
Let me just say, my mother lives at Leisure World half the year in Orange County, which is 20,000 seniors, or something like that, 30,000 seniors, and their 2-story buildings do not have elevators. And the people who need elevators just rent the 1st floor. But that entire complex, their 2-story buildings, is elevator-less. It was all built in the 1950s. And I wanted to throw that out there. Doesn't seem to stop them from moving to Leisure World. Now it's called Laguna Woods. I'm sorry, Mom. She always corrects me. It's not Leisure World anymore, it's Laguna Woods.
And from a staff perspective, I understand the Housing Authority's concern in an acquisition rehabilitation proposal. Once you get into rehabilitation, anything could happen once you open up a wall. So there is a level of uncertainty. But in supporting this proposal, we took a look at I believe we received some proposals for some 30-unit buildings. And we looked at this and thought a small 18-unit project that is small but still large enough to be competitive in an application at the tax credit. I mean, you cannot submit a 4-unit acquisition rehab, a 6-unit acquisition rehab. It has to be something in a minimum number of 18. This is a safe project from that perspective. In looking at the acquisition and the Housing Authority's funding at risk for that, we discussed earlier how the developer has an option that takes them beyond the tax credit, at least first-round tax credit application. There is no risk in the Housing Authority putting out money, committing money to that project at this point in time. When the authority's money does kick in, it'll be after we have an identified and approved project through all the funding sources. So in an ideal world, if we are going to cut our teeth on an acquisition rehabilitation project, this particular proposal is one of the safest to go out and venture out in and look at supporting.
Mr. Quintero.
Well, as I mentioned at a previous meeting, I mean, my idea when this concept first was proposed, I was thinking in terms of buildings that were built in the 70s and late 60s, early 80s, that sort of somewhat modern type of buildings. We just didn't have anyone that came to us with that type of building. Did we go out and solicit any listings that were current for sale? I mean, that to me is a more ideal building to rehab, quite frankly.
We did take a look at some buildings that were offered for sale. We didn't identify, staff level didn't identify any that we would wanted to bring back to the authority for consideration. We did have some developers discuss with us proposals for various buildings that were out there. If you recall, the Housing Authority considered two proposals from this particular developer. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the second proposal that you elected not to pursue was in the 30-unit range.
Larger project.
30-unit range, which, in looking at that, that is a big number of units to try and take on. And as Mr. Housing Authority Chair Najarian had mentioned earlier, what other items or issues are we trying to address with the rehabilitation of this proposal? We have a project in which the units are occupied by families that really should be individuals and or single. There's a density issue going on with the living conditions. There is a parking problem going on with the facility. It is a building that, given its age, is in relatively good shape, and we have the ability to preserve it for a long number of years from now, versus and we're somewhat fortunate that the existing owner has kept the building in fair shape. Oftentimes we see buildings like this really in disrepair, and just landlords getting as much as they can with investing as little as they can into these types of buildings.
Peter, let me test your memory. On Central, south of Colorado, right side going down, there's a 5-6-story apartment complex. I seem to recall that we looked at that to purchase, and we said, no, too run down, too everything. Someone did purchase it, rehabbed the whole thing, and said, wow, it turned out okay. We rejected it. We thought it was too much problem. Do you?
That's correct. It's right across the street, St. Mary's Church, I believe.
Yeah.
2 individual buildings, probably 4 stories in height.
Yeah.
Management problems. The Housing Authority explored an acquisition rehab type of activity, elected not to pursue it. And I'd say probably 2 years later, a market rate developer purchased it and went through a long process of rehabbing.
That building is pretty old, too.
Correct.
But again, it's a market rate development.
Market rate development.
So, I mean, again, the idea for us is, as the board recalls, is the home funds that we have, we were looking for the right combination of projects to fund with respect to the amount of money that we needed to allocate by date certain. This is one of those projects that fits into the puzzle piece.
Would someone like to make a motion at 6A, 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, I don't mind going the first step, knowing this isn't the last step, right?
We're making a commitment of home funds. Our expenditures do not have to take place until we know that we have a project that's fully funded and ready to move forward.
And the cost of that, because there will be additional inspections to find out.
At this point in time, staff's determination is that the Housing Authority's cost has been set with the approval at this
The
meeting.
developer will probably do more investigative work on his true cost to do this.
There will be some more investigative work, not much more, because they're submitting an application at the end of the month.
Because I know when you buy a house, apartment, you have to have that building inspected, and then if they come up with all these improvements, it's whether the buyer or the seller pays that additional cost. No firsthand on that. So I would assume if the developer is going to put money in this, he's going to do adequate inspections to get within a ballpark of what he thinks it's going to cost. And that's what I expect to be coming additionally. That's what I thought I heard.
Correct.
But this is the beginning, not the end.
Because all the different costs are set, if there's something that is extraordinary beyond what the cost anticipated, we'll come back to you.
Right. So I'll move 6A, 1, 2, and 3
Second.
at this point.
Okay, roll call, please.
Authority members: Friedman,
Yes.
Nukian,
No.
Incy,
Yes.
Brazian,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item.
Next item at B is Director of Community Development regarding rehabilitation of a 9-unit multifamily rental housing development at 1911 Gardena Avenue. One is a resolution authorizing a multifamily affordable housing rehabilitation loan agreement with S.H. Hope and Compassion Center, a California nonprofit public benefit corporation. At 2 is a resolution appropriating $285,000 to provide funds for the project. 3 is a motion approving fiscal year 2011-12 HUD Home Action Plan Amendment to authorize the transfer of funds in support of rehabilitation project.
Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. This is the second leg in the three-legged stool of projects that we were bringing before you for home funding. Mr. Zovak will run through the quick details of this very cost-effective project.
Let's see how quick we are here. Project number 2 is 1911 Gardena Avenue. This location right here is located just north of the railroad tracks, just east of Glendale Boulevard, and just south of San Fernando Road. The owner of the property, and there's a picture of the facade. In this particular case, it is a stucco wood frame building. This building is a 9-unit apartment building. It's a mix that contains 5 one-bedroom units, 4 two-bedroom units, constructed in 1963. The developer, who is S.H. Ho Hope Compassion Center, purchased the property using their own funding about a little over a year ago. They're proposing to rehabilitate the units and preserve those units to serve as permanent housing for formerly homeless households, in particular households that are exiting the city's emergency and transitional shelters, and being able to provide this facility as the next step up for these households as they proceed through the continuum of care. The requested assistance is $285,000, which is approximately $32,000 per unit, approximately $22,000 per bedroom. It will be consist of home funds. Again, this is for rehabilitation only. The acquisition has already been executed by the developer. And similar to the previous project, we are asking and seeking Housing Authority approval of a resolution approving to entering into an affordable housing. I take that back. I'm reading the wrong document. Approval to enter into a rehabilitation loan agreement with S.H. Ho Hope and Compassion Center, authorization and approval of a resolution of appropriation, and approval of a Housing Authority motion approving a fiscal year 2011-2012 HUD Home Action Plan amendment.
I will move the item if there's no comments.
Is there any discussion?
Question.
Mr. Mnuchin?
The $285,000 is the total cost for the project, for the rehab? It's the total cost?
Total cost of the rehabilitation of the 9 units, yes.
Right. So we're paying the total cost of the rehab itself?
Correct.
And the developer has purchased the property already?
Correct.
Do we know how much that was purchased for?
We do.
It was $1.2 million is what they purchased the property for. $1.2 million.
Is there tax credits for this project?
No, there is not. This
So
is
So the developer has committed $1.2 million of their funds?
correct.
Okay. That makes more sense to me.
Well, yeah, because they're nonprofit.
Right,
You know,
but
they're
still.
completely they raise the money to do that.
Right, but still, it shows commitment from the developer of their own funds, not 75% government funds, so.
But if I may,
may.
Housing Authority member Mnuchin, this particular developer had a commitment to spend, I believe, $2 million towards affordable housing in exchange for the Housing Authority and City Council support of a HUD Section 108 loan to fund the city's new homeless shelter. So it wasn't just a nonprofit developer coming out and saying, I wish to spend $2 million in affordable housing. It was an arrangement that was made to facilitate another development just down the street, as a matter of fact, for the city's new homeless shelter. So it did have some twist to it.
It does, it's still, I'm much more comfortable with this arrangement than the reverse where you have 75% and 25%.
And it is from a staff perspective, it is a much more simpler project. It's just straight rehab on a building already owned by a developer.
And as Mr. Quintero was talking, it's a 1963 building, that makes
More modern.
I'll support this project.
Roll call, please.
Authority members Friedman. Yes. Mnuchin.
Yes.
Mincy.
Yes.
Karazian.
Yes.
Carroll.
Yes.
Weaver.
Aye.
Chair Najarian.
Yes. Any authority member or staff comments?
Move to adjourn.
Authorities adjourned.
Okay, we'll call to order the June 26, 2012 meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have a roll call?